Welcome back, everyone. I'll tell you what, this is something that I've been wanting to talk about, but with life happening so fast, with the new addition to of my little boy, baby Hudson, it's taken me a little while to get to you all. First off, I want to thank each and every one of you. If you're a returning follower of the channel and have seen a lot of the videos and watched a lot of my videos and stuck with me, I really appreciate you all for this. It was an unbelievable year. This season was crazy. Obviously, looking back at the season, the goal of winning Angler of the Year was always the end goal. But for it to actually happen, it's very special. So we're gonna dive into that right now. And dive into some of the intricate details of what went down throughout the season. Some of the questions, actually, some questions from fans about the season. And so you might want to stick along, or stick around, that is. This should be a fun one.
Let's go.
We're here in Mexico. We are in the Dominican Republic. So I'm going to tell you a couple of different tips that have helped me over the years.
Wow! Unbelievable! Jacob Wheeler makes history!
All right, so to dive into this, before we dive into the whole season, obviously the goal of the season is to, I try to set a goal every single year. Number one goal is to win a single event. In tournament bass fishing, okay, you got to understand this. The winningest tournament bass fisherman in the world, Kevin Van Dam, I think he's won like 23 majors or 24, and he's been fishing for 35 years. So winning a single tournament every season is like dingy. Like you done did something, So that's obviously the first goal, to win a single event. The second goal is to ultimately qualify. Really, number one is qualify for the Red Crest and qualify for the championship. And then third, which is important, is ultimately winning Angler of the Year. You have to have a lot of things happen for you to win an Angler of the Year. You have to have a lot of things go right. You have to make a lot of good decisions. And so ultimately, it just has to be the perfect season. And really stepping back on this a little bit, the last 4 or 5 seasons that I've fished, it has been like great, good years, but I've always just come up too short. Like I remember 2016, I think it was in the top 5 in the FLW. The Bassmaster Elite Series, I think I finished 3rd, 5th, and 10th or something like that, somewhere in the top 10. And then in the BBTs, I finished like third, maybe like third, and ultimately the last few years has been third and third. I think I've been right in the top 10 almost every single year, and I can't seem to win an Angler of the Year. So that definitely it wears on you a little bit. It's like getting so close in a tournament, but it's your whole season. You know what I'm saying? Like you're getting so close in a tournament, you're always finishing, bridesmaid, or you're always 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Yes, it's great. Obviously, you look at it from on the outside looking in, and you're like, dang, that was an awesome year. But you always want to push yourself to be better. And that was something that, for me, I set a goal this season. To me, meant more to try to win Angler of the Year and to put more effort into winning Angler of the Year. I actually did not fish the pro circuit this season because I wanted to put more effort into ultimately the 7 BPT events that I ultimately had to fish. So, with that being said, let's dive into the lakes and some of the decisions that I made. I'm going to try to go through these, not super quickly, but I'm going to try to go through these to where I can maybe you guys can learn something from the decisions, whether the good ones, the bad ones, a little bit of it all. So, let's go check. So the BPT this season, first lake, was Sam Rayburn. Okay. Sam Rayburn was in March. You looked at it, man, it's a huge lake. It's a big bass factory in Texas. Oh, man, we're going to crush them. They had a big event there. I think they had a Bass Champs or something there like 2 weeks earlier. It was like warm. And it was like perfect. Like they crushed them. It was like, oh man, this is going to be an absolute slugfest. So going into this tournament, I'm already thinking, man, I'm going to have to catch 80 pounds, 90, 100 pounds of fish. You're going to have to catch a lot of fish to ultimately make it to even the knockout round. Well, of course, season opener, Alberta Clipper comes rolling in, big cold front, and fishing gets tough. What ultimately that makes happen is, hey, those females were up there shallow. they start to pull back. They get into a little bit weird, especially Florida strain bass. And I know a lot of those fish there are Florida strain and have that, hybrid-ish mix. Those fish were tough. That event, I really just fished around a lot. I had a few bites in practice. If you watched a little bit of the practice vlog or anything like that, a few bites throwing a jerkbait, had a few bites flipping bushes, a few bites doing about everything, fishing up there, super shallow, vibrating jig. And I didn't know, and this is how I really start a lot of tournaments, is I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't have necessarily a set game plan. I have an idea of what I want to do. And so in that event, I went into the mindset of, hey, I'm going to catch pre-spawn fish that had not quite moved all the way up into the shallow water, 2, 3, 4 feet towards the main lake. And then if I couldn't get those to go, I was going to go up one of the rivers and some of the backs of the pockets, some of those places where I could throw a vibrating jig, a swim jig, stuff like that I can generate a few bites or even flip. So day one, I roll out there, I catch a few on a jerkbait, I catch a giant and almost a 715, absolute giant, throwing a jerkbait. And I remember the biggest decision in this tournament, day one, I ended up having a pretty good day. Day two, I go back and try to do the exact same thing, which a ton of us anglers, I know you've been there, you try to go back to do the exact same thing, okay? You go back, you're like, man, I had a good day one, go back to the same area, they got to replenish, and it just goes. It's horrible. So now you're stuck in this decision, man. And in day one, I caught quite a few of my fish down the lake, and then I caught quite a few fish up the lake, but I felt like I milked it for all it was worth. And in the morning bite was really good for down the lake, and then I was like, man, the morning bite on day number 2 was horrible. I'm sitting there and I'm like scratching my head, and I'm like, gosh, dude, I can't get a bite. I caught a couple fish. I can hear score tracker ding, ding, ding dropping, right? And I'm like, we got to make a decision. So this is all that bass fishing is really comes down to is really decision making. Decision making makes you or breaks you. And I had a choice. I remember sitting there. It was the end of the second period. I want to say I was in like 17th or 18th or right there on the bubble of getting kicked out, not even making it to the knockout round. How are you going to win Angler of the Year if you don't even make the first cut? That's where your mindset's at. Like, what in the world? You come into this one event at a time. So I'm sitting there and I look, and I'm like, all right, I can go back up the river and go back up into these pockets and throw a vibrating jig and flip and hope some more fish moved up. Or I can go and roll the dice and fish brand new water that I've never seen before. What are you normally going to do? Most of us are going to go back to the water that we're familiar with and go fish that water. I decided, hey, look, 2.5 hours, conditions are, a little bit of wind. I'm going to go down the lake. I'm just going to go just blind. So I go down the lake, catch a few fish on a jerkbait, end up coming back and ultimately qualifying for the knockout round, just bumping myself in, and end up finishing in, I think, 12th or 13th place in the knockout round, or end up like right there, just outside the top 10. Otfog ends up winning the tournament up the river, just doing his thing. And we go on to event number 2. But that one, I definitely was a little sketch. I'm like, man, we came out of Sam Rayburn with like, whew, we made it out of here alive. Second event was Lake Travis, which I had sort of had that one eye in that tournament for a while after seeing it on the schedule. That's a tournament lake, and a lake that I got really close to winning an elite event on. Ended up second there. I just wanted revenge on that lake. I felt like I had a good understanding of what the fish did there. Tons of bass in Lake Travis. It's a big body of water, really long body of water, and there's just so many fish. But ultimately, being tons of fish to be caught, I had to decide, do you go for numbers, which are typically down the lake, or do you go for quality, where I had got a second place finish in that elite event in general areas I felt like that lived up in the upper parts of the regions of the lake. And I decided, to go fishing where it was a quality versus quantity. That's what I liked that area. I liked the stained water, a little bit dirtier water. And a lot of these fish were coming off the bed. They were coming off the spawn. Some of them were still spawning. in their shad spawn docks. That's when I picked up that vibrating jig, a swim jig, and I went to work skipping those docks, and ultimately ended up edging Bobby Lane out for the win. Now, back up just a little bit on this one. I remember after practice, I did not have a good practice. To be honest with you, I did not have a good practice at all. I remember I had maybe like 3 or 4 scoreable bites in practice doing that deal, maybe like on a jig, swim jig and a vibrating jig. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. And I saw some spawning fish, and I marked some spawning fish, and I had some fish on docks, and I had some fish schooling, and I had a little hodgepodge of it all, but I was just unsure if I was going to ultimately be able to actually, I was going to actually be able to make it, and do well. So I just said, you know what? Quality versus quantity. Quality versus quantity. I go up the river, ultimately winning the tournament, and it just sort of transpired throughout the event. I figured it out in the event. Ultimately, just day one, having an unbelievable day. I catch like 24 pounds. I catch like 24 pounds on my best 5. I catch like a dang 70 pounds of bass that day. I catch so many 3 and 4 or 5 pounders. It was awesome. Absolutely insane. Just was one of those great days. Broke my line on a hook set, catch my line, get it in the boat, set the hook on a fish behind a dock, has a snake on it. It was just like it was a crazy event. So to come out ultimately winning this event by 1 ounce to Bobby Lane, hats off to Bobby Lane again, just obviously Bobby fished his tail off. But winning that event and getting a ton of confidence going into Harris Chain. So things are sort of ticking along, things are ticking along. We get to Harris Chain, I go to pre-practice Harris Chain before it goes off limits. I look around, I have a pretty good vibe, hey man, I'm going to stay on Lake Harris, man, but I don't know, there's a lot of opportunity. You got like a pop gut. Well, you didn't have a pop in this one. You had Dora, you Clair, you had Little Harris, Big Harris, Eustis, and then Griffin. So you had all these lakes to choose from, and you had to figure it out in a day and a half. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to stick in Little Harris and just in Harris and just hope that I can figure it out. It's a broad area, a lot of good water. If I could figure it out, I'll be better off. Had an okay practice, got on a little bit of a shad spawn thing. And this is the tournament that the wheels came off a little bit, Day one, I had a decent practice. I'm like, all right, I'm going to catch them. I caught some offshore grass, got some fish out around boat docks, got some fish up shallow, got some fish on some brush, got some fish on some hard places. Man, I'm going to catch some bass. Well, day one of this tournament was the most struggling time. It's just mind-boggling. You sit there and you're just you cannot land a bass. Brody was in the boat filming that day, and I just remember just being like, dude, what are the odds? And it just kept going and kept going. And I think this is really where I step back, and I've talked about this a little bit. When you step back and you look at that event, and you look at those moments, and this is for all the anglers out there, young anglers who've been fishing for years. You look back at that moment, and you're like, keep losing them. It's almost a mindset thing. You set the hook, you get lazy with your hook set, you almost anticipate to lose the next bite. It's very difficult to break out of that in the moment. It's you just are mentally, your mental side of the sport, this is what this is really what it is. You're just gosh, man, you just think you're going to lose them, and it happens. I think I ended up catching 7 out of my 19 bites that I had that day that were scoreable. Worst day, or 6 of them, I don't even know. It was my worst day in competitive bass fishing as far as hook to land ratio I've ever seen in my entire life. But hey, this is the thing. I had a reset. We got to go out. I had another day to get back after it. And the thing in that event was a lot of those fish were up shallower, and I'm big on covering water. You guys see me put the trolling motor down, I get after. Whoa, 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 whoa. The one thing that I learned from this event was sometimes you got to slow down. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The second day, qualifying day number 2, I'm on the cut. I end up losing a big one at the end. The very last cast, I was 4 pounds out. I lose a 4.5 pounder. That would have put me inside the cut. Anyway, my good buddy Ott Defoe goes on to win the event on the exact same stretch that I lost most of my fish on day number 1. And as I was watching live, I could see him and how he was analyzing a lot of these little pieces of cover. I would make 3 or 4 casts at him. But those fish would come up there and they'd bite a vibrating jig or they'd bite your crankbait and they would just nick, tip it, tick it. And he would make several casts to that same little, like whether it was a log or a stump or it was a dock post. Just repetitive cast and ultimately make that fish react. And he won the tournament on the exact same stretch. I found the winning stretch, but I did not make the decisions. I didn't fish slow enough. I didn't make the adjustments that I needed to do. So that one stung a little bit. That one was the one that you guys have heard me talk a lot, but it's those tournaments like that allow you learn from your mistakes, okay? So for me, just learning from my mistakes and really analyzing. I spend more time analyzing the tournaments I do bad in than I ever do like that you do well in. You're like, man, it was good. I killed it. Whatever. Caught him, man. That was awesome. Won the tournament. Couldn't do anything better. Whatever. But those tournaments that you do bad in, you sit there and you look at them and you're like, yeah, I messed up on that one. So that's sort of my take on Harris Chain. Dropped me way down. I'm sitting there. In number 4, Lake Chickamauga, we get back. And this is the thing. When you get your back against the wall, I knew at that point in time my odds of winning Angler of the Year were not very good. I think I was in like 10th in points at that point in time after having a horrible tournament at Harris Chain. Ended up like 60th or something like 55th or whatever it was. But Lake Chickamauga, hey, the sun will come out tomorrow. Man, it was a... Going to Chickamauga, obviously, the lake that I live right here, right on the shores of Lake Chickamauga, 3 minutes away. I know the lake well. Wanted to win it for sure, but it was because of the format and every fish counts over 2 pounds. In the way that we have cuts and everything else, there's a strategy behind this that you have to think about. Like, okay, do you show your cards? Do you not show your cards? Practice went pretty well. I knew there was fish several places. The thing about Lake Chickamauga is, over the years, places that used to be really, really, really good are straight up community holes now. That used to be you never see any boats there, or you see a boat every once in a while. But now it's the point where you're just like nonstop. People are on. Anglers are finding them. Electronics is getting better. Maps are getting better. People are seeing anglers on locations. People are seeing anglers on TV a lot more. Anglers are seeing anglers on spots and going back and looking around. So it's got to the point now with Chickamauga being such a lake that there's been so many national events on in national coverage that a lot of people know where it goes down at. So it's very difficult to find sneaky places on this lake. So that, going back, I really fish community places to qualify in. I fished community stuff, tried to hold back. I had a camera in my boat. I tried to sort of dodge the cameras because every time you had a camera in your boat, you knew, like, man, if you had to go to a place and you really wrecked on them, you just never know when you're not out there on the water who's going to be out there. If somebody saw you on live, how's that going to happen? How's that going to work? Are those fish going to get busted up even more tonight? You get out there in 2 days, or are they going to be there or not? So there's a lot of this. This was the most strategic event that I could have played. Ultimately, to end up coming second, fishing offshore, doing my thing, what I love to do, throwing a DT20, cranking DT16, scrounger, caught some on a jig, caught some just sort of hodgepodge of offshore fishing. Ended up second to the GOAT, man, Kevin Van Dam, and it still amazes me. And I told Kevin about Lake Chickamauga on this event. He won the tournament on one of the absolute biggest community holes on the pond, okay? And some of the people who fish Lake Chickamauga know, probably one of the biggest, absolutely. Like, there's not let's put it this way. There's not a afternoon in the month of June that you can get there typically on that location, that area, and there not be 1 or 2 boats fishing. So just to give you an understanding, and Kevin won there. And this is the thing, only Kevin Van Dam. This is not a knock on Kevin at all. Only Kevin Van Dam could have won that tournament in that location. He is truly unbelievable. Catching them cranking, making those fish react. Hats off. That was amazing. So, jumping forward to St. Lawrence River, smallmouth, spawning, flogger. You guys seen the madness. I'm not going to dive into the smallmouth madness. It was crazy. I caught stupid numbers of them. It was awesome. And it was something that for me, like I've never experienced that crazy of smallmouth fishing in my career. There's fish everywhere up spawning. There's fish cruising. There's fish post spawn eating little black foot, like little hair jigs. It was a lot of fun, and it was something that I didn't have a whole lot of experience. Let's put it that way. Using that flogger or really fishing for spawning smallmouth. It's just something that I've learned throughout that event. It's another event that I just learned as I went, and you just sort of have to do that sometimes. You just sort of have to roll with the punches. Here it is. And that's what it is, and it is what it is. Ultimately ended up to win the tournament. It felt awesome. But again, I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, Angler of the Year, is it still there? I don't know. So maybe we now still have a chance. So right after the event, I remember we went back home, went to the 4th of July. Like we went and had a party up at actually Brandon Coulter's place, and all the Brigadoon with all a bunch of friends. Jay Mark came in, and I remember right after the 4th of July, I'm like, I think I have a chance to win Angler of the Year, but I'm not sure. We have 2 more events left. We have Lake Champlain. If you hear this the feet. That's Olivia upstairs. She's running around. Sorry, I had to break that one up. If y'all have toddlers, y'all know what I'm talking about. So I went back to after 4th of July. I said, look, if I have a chance to win Angler of the Year, which I feel like I'm still a ways back. Obviously, Ottifo's fishing unbelievable, and Ott was killing it. I said, you know what? I have to go up and pre-practice on Lake St. Clair. They're not going to be doing the exact same thing. Obviously, they're not going to be in the same locations, but I need to go up there and at least give myself a chance, okay? Putting the time in, putting the work in. There's multiple different things that ultimately it comes down to when you are trying to prep and be, to be as good as you can be. And that's really all you can do. And you hear that all the time. It's cliche, but really you can only be the best you that you can be. And for me, the work ethic side of it, I feel like if I don't put 120% in to every single event, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to regret it. If I end up finishing last, I might look at the mistakes that I made, but I'm going to say, look, I put all my effort into that, and it is what it is. So going into that, I went up there to St. Clair, looked around, caught several fish, spent a lot of time up there prepping for this event that was coming up in September. Felt pretty good about it, and came back, flew up to Champlain. My boat and truck was there. Got my boat and truck. Got all my stuff together. Going out to Champlain. A smallmouth beat down. Ottifo. Was catching largemouth. Jacopo Galele crushed them. Ended up second place fishing for largemouth. So it was really a hodgepodge of it all. Got on a really good pattern. Again, it really progressed throughout the tournament. I dialed things in. As I dialed things in a little bit more, I realized sort of what was transpiring, caught some fish on a drop shot. Really don't have a lot on that side of things. I'm like, man, what would I have done differently? It was just a perfect storm, and I was able to bring back, my 3rd win of the season, which is crazy because you look at the tournaments, I caught some on boat docks at Travis, win the tournament on boat docks, skipping a jig. I catch them sight fishing at an event, then I catch them out deep for smallmouth. It's like the 3 completely opposite, different kind of stuff. So, but it was a lot of fun. So, going into the last event, Lake St. Clair, I put the time in. I knew that it was not in my hands. Ott has been fishing unbelievable. I knew at that point in time I had to qualify for the top 10 and let the cards fall where they fall. I have to try to win the event. And that's what I did. Day 1 of the tournament, spent my time on St. Clair, catching drop shot fish, catching some fish on Ned style baits, and really catching, pitching it out there, using forward facing sonar. And then ultimately, this is the thing about big lakes and preparing, like already knowing September. And this is like the preparation for that event started in like July. And when I went up there to pre-practice, I knew when the wind blows, man, I'm not going to be able to compete probably on St. Clair and catch enough fish. So I spent time in the Detroit River prepped for that event in the Detroit River to when, if you have a day that you have to generate bites, whether it was largemouth bites, smallmouth, I wanted to be able to at least keep my head above water if need be. So it comes out to where day one I catch 100 pounds of smallmouth, qualifying day one, day two I qualify on, but it was in practice mode because I knew knockout round it was going to be rough, it was going to be windy, it was going to be like really bad conditions on the lake, going to blow 20 miles an hour, big waves. It's going to be tough to really fish for those fish and generate a few bites. I was going to generate enough bites. I needed some bites, but I didn't feel like I was going to catch a lot of them. And I needed to catch as many as I possibly could because every single point at that point in time, being only 10 points back from on, really I had to make that top 10. So I go on. Ott to Foe qualifies for the knockout round. And then it comes to that point where basically, look, you have Ott, myself, we're competing for Angler of the Year in the last event of the season. Second to last day. Knockout round, we're there. I take off. And I remember, this is like a point where I remember I take off out of right there on St. Clair, and I run out and I look around on my graph, and I just don't like the way the fish were set up at all that morning. I knew that it just was not going to happen. So I just hightail. I just get that gut feeling. I hightail it down to the Detroit River. I shut down, and I start reeling them in. I'm like, yeah, I'm reeling them in. I'm just catching them, and I'm like in first, and I'm like, what the heck? And I've had a lot of experience on the Detroit River, and I love it. I like it a lot. But it was like one of those things you just know you have a goal in mind, and it's just getting that top 10, giving yourself a chance. I remember at the end of the first period, I asked, where's Ott? And he said, he's down a little ways. And at the end of the second period, he's down there a little, he was down there towards the bottom. I'm like, man, Ott's Ott. He's going to catch them. He always does. And he comes back towards the end of the third. And I remember there was a point in time where I'm like, I have to go catch a fish. And I run over to this flat, and I get in this little area where I caught a couple in pre-practice in July, and I cast over there, and I catch a 3-pound smallmouth to solidify a top 10. And I was just like, things were getting, like, everything was like, oh my gosh, I was so happy at that point in time. So much emotion went on. Obviously, I'm pumped up. I'm getting texts nonstop. And hold up here. To get this little sucker right there, I mean, that's awesome. Angler of the Year. It was something that I'll never forget. I just want another one. So before we leave here, I know I was long-winded there. Obviously, you guys know me. I'm that way sometimes. I wanted to break down like the actual deal, and some of you might watched all this, some of you might not have. To the point where, like, if you're still with me at this point in time, I'm gonna give you like 3 more questions right here from the fans that basically they wanted to know. So here we go. Questions of the fans. What was the biggest single thing that helped you win Angler of the Year? I would say confidence is a huge part of it all. And I would say work ethic. You cannot cut any corners. You definitely can't cut any corners. That's the key. Is if you cut at corners, you hear it all the time. There's no substitution for time in the water, but that's really true. If I would have put the time in on St. Clair prior to that event in the last term of the year, I'm not going to say I wouldn't have won Angler of the Year, but there's a point that was a very big determining factor. So I would say just work ethic, working hard, and putting everything you have into it. What was the worst mistake you made this season? I felt, and we talked about this earlier in this video, what was the worst mistake that I made this season? I would say not slowing down and adapting and changing to what the fish were doing on Harris. That was something that I knew there was something there. I just didn't quite figure it out, and it was my fault. And I look back at that, and I'm like, gosh, but that was what it was. And last but not least is, how awesome is it to have the support group you have at home, not only at home, but with Mark, DC, and Adrian at the events. Mark, DC, and Adrian are my boys. They are my family away from home. We spend a lot of time together. And if you guys get to watch the channel at all, those are my guys day in and day out. we're truly all like brothers. I'm not even gonna lie to y'all. We call each other all the time, BS all the time. Always we talk about life, everything that's going on, fishing, the whole family, the whole 9 yards. That's what it's about, man. If I didn't have that brotherhood, that event was super special to have all the guys back in the same house. It was pretty dang awesome, and I'm pumped for next season. I am pumped for next season to ultimately see what goes down. It's going to be a heck of a season. We start off on Caney Lake. 2021 was a pretty dang awesome year. You just don't know what 2022 is going to bring. So thank you guys so much for following along. If you have watched this whole thing, bless you. I appreciate it. I know I talk a lot. I try to break it down a little bit. Hopefully you learned something. Maybe you learned something from my mistakes. Maybe you learned a little bit about strategy or something maybe behind the scenes that maybe I don't even know that you took something out of this video. If you did, make sure to give us a thumbs up in this one. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already do so. We really, truly appreciate it here at the channel, the Fishing Channel. We are out till the next one.